Peace. Welcome to Brother Mike X Speaks. Tonight we want to do honor to our brother, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on what would have been his 84th birthday. Dr. King was born on January 29th, 1929, and he was taken from us on April 4th, 1968. Dr. King is recognized as one of our most powerful leaders, and he definitely is. I just want to say a couple of words about some of the things that, most people feel they know about Dr. King. When it comes to Dr. King, the first thing many of us think about is his dream. Dr. King had a dream. I have a dream that one day, little black boys and white girls and white boys and black girls will be able to hold hands and sing about racial harmony and, the mainstream and how they depict Dr. King, they've tried to capture him and hold him at that point in his life. And Dr. King was much more than a dreamer. The actual I Have a Dream speech was delivered at the March on Washington on August 28, 1963. And as I said, Dr. King was murdered on April 4th, 1968. And that's a difference of about 5 years. The way they portray it, you would think that Dr. King had went on a permanent vacation after the March on Washington, after he delivered that historic speech, never spoke again, never marched again, and just one day just happened to be murdered. That does an injustice to Dr. King, because after the March on Washington on August 28, 1963, he continued to fight segregation, Jim Crow, inequality, Jim Crow laws, inequality, racism. He continued to strive to put pressure on the local segregationist governments in the South, and to put pressure on the federal government to enforce the laws of this land and guarantee the rights to black people as full citizens of this nation. So Dr. King definitely much more than I Have a Dream. It should also be mentioned that Dr. King, at the time of his death, was not very popular. He wasn't popular amongst the government, and the federal government and the mainstream liberal forces that had been supporting him as he marched through the South. And he had begun to lose some of his favor even with the young activists who had supported him throughout his marches in the South. The reason why the federal government began to turn on Dr. King and a lot of the mainstream liberal forces began to take their money from Dr. King and his Southern Christian Leadership Conference, his organization, is because Dr. King began to speak out against the federal government as it went deeper and deeper into the Vietnam War. Dr. King was definitely a man of peace, and he believed that if I'm telling my people that we should march nonviolently and turn our backs on peace, on war and violence here, then, we shouldn't, I could never advocate that we take part in a war all the way around the world that's sucking millions and millions of dollars away from our movement in striving to eradicate poverty, racism, and inequality in America. So Dr. King spoke out publicly against this war, and Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the president at the time, was very bitter, about that, and never met with Dr. King again after he spoke out against that war. Many of the mainstream liberal forces, as I said, they began, the money that they was contributing to Dr. King's organization, they took that all away. Many of the black forces, you had people like Roy Wilkins in the NAACP and other people who, stepped to Dr. King and was telling him, you're making a huge mistake. You're destroying the civil rights movement by speaking out against this war. And Dr. King, being the honest man that he was, he responded that I don't make decisions for the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, based upon our bank account. So he was in effect telling them that I'm not no sellout. I'm not going to, my voice, my silence will not be bought. I'm going to speak from my conscience. And I believe that this war is wrong. I believe that it's taking millions of dollars away from an opportunity to eradicate poverty and inequality in America. And I'm going to continue to speak. Many of the young activists, and it should be noted that when we talk about the civil rights movement, many people just say Dr. King, Dr. King, Dr. King. And while Dr. King was a great man, Dr. King was not Superman. He was not God. He wasn't, an alien, with superpowers. He had thousands and thousands of supporters that gave him the power and the recognition to fight the battles that he fought. And he was a great human being, and he had a powerful voice and a powerful vision. But if we don't recognize these young activists and young people, people like Stokely Carmichael, people like James Foreman and John Lewis and H. Rap Brown and so many others that stood with Dr. King, if we don't mention them, then we do a disservice to them, A lot of these young activists, by the time 1965, 66, 67 came around, they were putting pressure on Dr. King to become more radical, to, as a matter of fact, they helped to push Dr. King into speaking out against the Vietnam War. And a lot of them had got tired by that point of getting hit in the head with bottles and bricks and sticks and things like that. And Stokely Carmichael at that time called out for, we want black power. We want black power. And black power didn't mean violence. Black power meant that as black people, we want what other people take for granted. We want to have the right to call the shots in our own neighborhoods. We want to control the politics. We want to control the economics. We want to control the schools and things of that nature. And so, there was, Dr. King found himself caught in the middle. The government was turning its back on him, and the young activists began to turn his back on him. And a lot of people today, they speak about Dr. King glowingly, about they love him and they admire him and things of that nature. But Dr. King wouldn't have been standing with some of the people today who claim him, because Dr. King would never support any wars. Dr. King would never support some of the same conditions that exist now that existed back then. So I'm gonna wrap this up. I hope that maybe I cleared up some of the things, some of the misconceptions about Dr. King. I hope that maybe I sparked some interest in you to want to learn more about Dr. King. As we speak, I'm finishing a book right now that's called And the Walls Came Tumbling Down. This book was written by Ralph David Abernathy, and he was Dr. King's best friend. And he walked arm in arm with Dr. King from 1955, when Dr. King came into the public eye, with the Montgomery Bus Improvement Association, Montgomery Improvement Association, and they boycotted the buses. This boycott was sparked by Rosa Parks, another name that you should be familiar with. And Dr. King came to the fore, as a nationally recognized individual during that campaign. Ralph Abernathy was with him from that point all the way up until April 4th, 1968, when he was murdered in Memphis, Tennessee, when he went down there to help one of his friends with a sanitation strike. A lot of the black people down there were not getting their just due as sanitation workers, and Dr. King went down there to help them with their strike and got murdered while he was in Memphis, Tennessee. And the walls came tumbling down. You know, it was definitely a powerful book. Him being Dr. King's best friend, it's taught me a whole lot. It showed the intimate side of Dr. King. Like we know about his public persona, but Ralph David Abernathy helps to talk about Dr. King, you know, behind doors, and it's a very interesting book. So on that note, you know, I'm gonna say, you know, I'm definitely glad that Dr. King walked his way. I'm glad that he sacrificed and did the things that he did, and it's our job now to keep the movement going, because a lot of the same things that he fought, struggled, and ultimately sacrificed his life for, a lot of those conditions are still here today. A lot of the things that we won at that time are being threatened. So, you know, happy birthday, Dr. King, and, you know, I say to y'all, peace. Thank you for tuning in.